From the center of the Americas to you, wherever you are, this is the end of days. Hello, exiles. Welcome home. The war on God is raging, and the end of days couldn't be more apparent. Looking at the state of the planet, and especially that of the good old USI, it is apparent that things are not going to go well for the West. Europe and the USI are in self-immolation mode, and left to their devices, all things equal, we shouldn't expect their survival too much longer. Of course, the Scarlet Harlot, aka the USI, is likely to court disaster somewhat more quickly than otherwise. The sooner she provokes Russia into nuking her, the better, as far as I'm concerned, because a Mad Max future is likely better than Plantationlandia, where everyone is a slave and forced into concentration camps and literally has only shit sandwiches to eat. At the point we've come to, relatively few Americans can be salvaged. Most are so fluoridated, poisoned, and demoralized that they simply lack the facility to think it through. They can't grasp the obvious and the true, even with it staring them in the face. For the suckers in the big cities, they likely won't be around long. If the nukes don't get them, the zombies will. Last chat, we spoke about weather modification and touched on the latest weather down in Texas, flooding and all that. Well, just when you think it cannot get worse, it does. So they've got this Doppler array, something like 160 of these things across the country. Not only can they control the weather with these things, they're called NEXRAD, Next Generation Weather Radar. They can do even worse. So who are they? They are a joint operation comprised of the National Weather Service, the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration, and the U.S. Air Force. A motley crew, to be sure, every bit as malevolent as you might surmise. Well, interestingly, there are cats out there who monitor what the S-band Doppler radars are getting up to. Now, an important thing to understand is what type of output these weapons have. And yes, like 5G, they are a weapons system. Turns out they beam at something like 750 kilowatts in the 2.7 to 2.9 gigahertz range, which they tell me is similar to a microwave oven. Anyway, this young nerd was monitoring these things just a few days ago, and he noticed something awfully peculiar and rather disturbing. These arrays were emitting across the country, east to west, microwave pulses for 12 hours straight, literally baking people as they slept. But it gets even better, so to speak, because they did this from 9:11 p.m. to 9:11 a.m., pretty precise. This obviously wasn't a mistake. These Satanists love their numbers, and most everything they do revolves around something called gematria, which is a kind of magical numerology. It's basically Kabbalistic, which is to say magic, witchcraft, Satanism, and it all comes down to secret society hocus pocus stuff that was kept pretty well under wraps until gaining currency more recently. If you watch them do what they do, you'll see that the same numbers keep reappearing over and over. Also, when someone's in the news, usually because they're dead, numbers associated with that person's name will come up. There's a bloke who does an entire podcast on the topic, link below. So it's debatable, the intent on microwaving people like that. It's, I imagine, probably not about straight out cooking people. And it makes one sort of wonder if the signal is intended to activate or interact with something inside people. It could be to cause some mental debilitation or to put people in a foul mood, Or it could be set to interact with something in the blood, say something that might have entered via a jab. Just speculation, but it makes one wonder. They are trying to kill you after all. If you haven't figured that out by now, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Go back to sleep. Seriously, you cannot be helped. They are getting bolder every day. They are destroying livelihoods left and right, putting poison into everything possible. The United States, the country you've known, will not exist in a few years' time, and maybe sooner than that. The USI will fail because it must. It's lost its morality, God, and will suffer just punishment on its account. Aside from the myriad ways the Satanists are trying to murder us all, a plan which, by the way, is not very well thought through, which is unsurprising given that evil has motivations blinding it to some of the obvious, as in they can't help themselves. Jesus told us that in the end times we will be persecuted for bearing witness in his name. We are seeing such as that more and more. We have heard of the little old ladies in ill health being given jail time for praying publicly in front of an abortion clinic. And then there's Jocelyn Harris, evicted for having shared Bible tracts. Right, she was evicted from where she was living. Not always do things end badly for freedom of religion. Sometimes the school or the state or whatever it was winds up losing in court. Yet that this stuff occurs more frequently when it is so obviously discriminatory is a sign of the times. Then, we had Joe Biden, the demented clown who this year proclaimed some transsexual nonsense on Easter Sunday. A sure potshot at Christians everywhere. Furthering the theme, Biden somehow banned any Christian-associated designs from the Easter art contest. This is from a man who pretends he's a Catholic. Well, there's a lot of Catholics who aren't really worshiping Jesus out there. People like the Pope. Here's one that would be totally unbelievable if not for that it happened on MSNBC. Some reporter there, whatever that word means anymore, reporter, fretted on air over the belief Christians have rights that come from God and not the government. Now, it's hard to know if said reporter is simply stupidly idiotic or a run-of-the-mill Satanist without anything to talk about, so he decided by the seat of his pants to come up with something. It can be hard to tell who's a Satanist and who's merely godless. It wasn't so long ago that the notion there were people out there who are Satanists, well, it seems kind of absurd to us. Sure, there have always been the Aleister Crowleys, but that seemed like fanatical and rather limited in scope. There's not that many out there like that, we thought. Yet the scope turns out to be much greater than we might have credited for. Once we realize that we're up against things such as this, they become much clearer. Satan may run amok, he may burn America down to its foundations, but he has no power over those who walk with Christ. In parting, I'd like to remind you of something that is in the Bible, and it's very interesting. In the Bible, throughout it, it repeats 365 times the same number as days in a year. Do not be afraid, it says. Oh, and hey, one more thing. I got to watching some conspiracy guys, the types who are always getting at the truth. Well, none of them believe nukes are real. And I think there's a good case to be made they're not. I also think that radiation vis-a-vis nuclear energy or bombs is way overstated. And this has been used, obviously, as a scare tactic. I do believe radiation is a thing. I mean, if you stick your head inside a microwave oven and, you can see what happens. I would agree that militaries around the world may have some pretty big bombs, however. And who's to say the Russians or whomever might not fire some of these large ordnance on some major cities in the USI? And let's say the US government correspondingly cranks up the 5G and the Doppler and causes what amounts to radiation poisoning. Remember, they're trying to kill you. Do not be afraid. And in seriousness, bro, and this is pretty serious, if you're in a big city, get the hell out of there ASAP. Because chances are you won't make it out if you wait until Armageddon. And you do really want to be around to see the other side of that. Vaya con Dios. Where do we go from here? So much to talk about. God helps those who help themselves. So whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. Be mindful, be helpful unto others, for there is salvation, and that salvation may be your own, and you not even know it. CB wanted me to mention, thanks for listening. If you like this content, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps.
Adios, and thanks for all the fish.